All right, now that we've seen the U.S.'s place in the world and we've seen the U.S.'s ideology regarding our place in the world relative to our foreign policy, it's time that we look at how other nation states view the United States and view our foreign policy particularly. Other nation states around the world view U.S. foreign policy as kind of a mixed bag, and our policy has been sometimes successful, sometimes unsuccessful, and this shadow of the past creates a more varied view of what we can do, what we have done, and the potential then for our leadership in foreign policy in the world. One of the historical problems has been that there is a difference sometimes between our rhetoric and our action. And this leads to anger and resentment from some nation states. One example might be that the United States believes in legal rights and equal legal protections. However, for example, we have detained terrorists indefinitely in Guantanamo Bay. Well, then that goes against our own stated principles in the Constitution, where people have a right to trial by jury in a timely fashion. This is linked to the idea of a varied U.S. foreign policy based on situation or circumstance. Sometimes we act and sometimes we don't. Sometimes we act on morality and sometimes we don't. And historically, our presidents have chosen when and where to act based on a particular situation or circumstance. And so others then criticize our foreign policy based on these situational morals and situational actions. And this leads them to criticize us based on our perception of ourselves. If we say, using the idea of American exceptionalism, that the U.S. is a beacon of good, that we believe in legal rights, that we believe in spreading democracy, that we believe in human rights, shouldn't this be in all places at all times? And shouldn't we act in this way even towards our own citizens? And when we fail at spreading morality, spreading democracy, protecting legal rights of individuals, then we face this criticism and potentially a challenge to our leadership and a challenge to our place of primacy in the world from other nations. So they may view our foreign policy as not as good, right? Less than exceptional than we do. Some examples down there at the bottom of the screen show that the United States sometimes advances morality, sometimes advances legal rights, sometimes advances democracy, and then sometimes it doesn't. Here's a visual representation of the difference between our rhetoric and reality. Well, we said in the earlier lecture that the U.S.'s national style is in part based on a belief in American exceptionalism, that we are number one. Well, we are number one, but not always in the way that we want to be. So here we can see that total crime, prisoners, heart attacks, McDonald's restaurants. Yes, we are number one in these things that aren't necessarily fantastic for our society. I will point out that we are no longer number one in CO2 emissions. China has surpassed us. Well, maybe we can look pleasantly at being number two in that situation. But nevertheless, this is a distinction between a superiority that we see represented by American exceptionalism and fact, a difference between our rhetoric and our reality. So there's also a difference between our rhetoric and reality when we claim that we stand for legal rights, equal legal protections, democracy, so on and so forth, and that we are the beacon for the rest of the world in these issues, that perhaps we're not. And so if you look at these positives, life expectancy, freedom of the press, internet speed, education, political corruption, so on and so forth, the United States doesn't rank as high as perhaps we think we should, or as high as we think we do. So, how is this going to affect our leadership in the world? How is this going to affect what we can do through our foreign policy? If others view us differently than we view ourselves, we're not going to be as effective in political leadership. If others view us differently than we view ourselves, perhaps then their view is negative, while ours may be positive. And this distinction between rhetoric and reality may then lead to trouble in the future when it comes to our leadership in foreign policy and our leadership in international affairs and our ability to influence other nation states and maintain that position of hegemony or primacy that we discussed in the first lecture. Following what we said about a distinction between rhetoric and reality, we also have to look at some instances when a political circumstance or situation may lead us down different policy paths than our ideals may otherwise define. Well, what's situational? What's moral? Territorial expansion we may see as a good thing with manifest destiny earlier in our nation state, but what did that lead to? Yeah, well, it led to the ill treatment of Native American populations and mass death due to disease and war, of course, with Native American populations. We may also claim to stand for individual liberty and individual freedom, but of course we have a history of slavery here in the United States. We may believe in national sovereignty, but we've had frequent intervention in Latin American nation states, even though we stand as a nation state and have historically against the ideals of colonialism. Today, we still have territories. We don't call them colonies, like Puerto Rico, like the Marshall Islands, like American Samoa. So we see this distinction between our rhetoric and reality based on the circumstance. Sometimes we're moral, sometimes we're not. Supporting dictatorships abroad, for example. During the 1980s, when Iraq was at war with Iran, we supported both sides with weapons, even though the rhetoric of our government was to not support terrorists, i.e., the state of Iran, and to not support dictators, i.e., Saddam Hussein's dictatorship in Iraq. But during that time, we've done so. When it is in our best interest, when the situation calls for it, we will act in a way that is antithetical to our own stated principles and ideologies. One major consequence for U.S. foreign policy and challenge to our supremacy in the world of situational morals and situational actions, a difference between our rhetoric and reality, is that it leads to anti Americanism. Anti Americanism is basically where nation states challenge us, people around the world challenge our positions, they point out our flaws, they push back against our presence in the world, our dominance in the world. This could be pushing back against globalization. Well, if American industry, business, so on and so forth is dominant, then we may see the lack of willingness among nation states to adopt trade policies to allow McDonald's in their country. Those are just some small examples. There are different types of anti-Americanism, however, there are different gradations. Some are very minor, some are very radical. Liberal anti-Americanism is the criticism that comes from our allies and other advanced nation states in the world who share our beliefs, share our practices, but they criticize the United States when it fails to live up to its own ideals. Well, some of those examples that we gave earlier may show liberal anti Americanism. We are challenged from our allies about the treatment of detainees in Guantanamo Bay, for example. Social anti Americanism is a little bit different. This is a pushback from nation states around the world based on a perceived cultural imperialism. Cultural imperialism is the idea that a nation state's culture is usurping another nation state's culture. And so then, with the spread of US TV, movies, music, others may feel that their own native cultures are under attack. And so they'll disavow and won't allow the representation of American ideals and American culture in their nation states. One example of this may be in France, where they have a policy on popular music radio stations that around 50% of it, the material has to be in the French language. Well, when a lot of popular music comes out of the United States or Great Britain, or most of it particularly, then you see a representation of them trying to protect their own culture versus the presence of others. Sovereign anti-Americanism is when the U.S. may threaten the existence of a state, not just in its cultural identity, but in its political identity. So when the U.S. uses our foreign policy to undermine the policies of other nation states, the power of other nation states, what they're trying to do, when we try to, as we have historically, foment revolutions in other nation states, supported coups in other nation states, this has led to a backlash, an anti-Americanism based on these foreign policies, that we are meddling in the independence and the sovereignty politically of other nation states. Radical anti-Americanism is what we see with terrorist organizations. This is a pushback against American values and principles and our foreign policy based on a perception that the United States is evil. Perhaps capitalism and democracy and human rights are seen as evil or anathema to another culture, another religion, others' values. And so then, if you view something as evil, it must be destroyed. And this is why this is named radical anti-Americanism. It's sort of a pushback from terrorist organizations, maybe through war, of American power, of American influence abroad. One last thing to look at regarding how others may view American foreign policy and Americans' place in the world is found in this visual representation. When people around the world are polled on who is the greatest threat to world peace, you see that many state that the United States is the greatest threat to world peace. Now, here in the United States and Canada and Great Britain and other nation states, we may see that Iran presently is the greatest threat to world peace because of their potential pursuit for nuclear weapons. But most nation states in the world think that the United States is the greatest threat to world peace. So once again, you see this difference between what we think of ourselves and what others think of us. And we have to understand and question what problems this leads to for American leadership in the world, what problems this leads to for our foreign policy and its successes, and what challenges to our hegemony, our primacy in the world, this perception of the United States may lead to. Over the course of the class, We will bring these issues back up. We will talk about them in context relative to other topics as well. This is the end of Chapter 1.